I'm Joel, and this is CryptoTech.Solutions. Welcome back to another episode of CryptoTech.Solutions. Today is Wednesday, April the 19th, and we have a really special guest on today, James Donaldson of Copperhead OS. What is Copperhead OS? They're I'm going to say small technology company in Canada. I'll let James speak to how big they are and how much they're growing. But they're taking on a really ambitious goal of fixing all of the security flaws in the Android operating system. Flaws that are generally known to Google and to the general security community, but for some reason really aren't being fixed by anybody else. So I'm going to let James explain all that to you. But before we get to James, let's hear a word from our sponsor.
Proton Mail is one of my absolute favorite services on the internet. They don't scan your emails for advertisers like Gmail, and they can't be hacked like Yahoo. How do I know this? Because Proton Mail is end-to-end encrypted, so that at no time are the contents of your email ever exposed. Only you hold the encryption key, so Proton Mail couldn't read your email even if they wanted to. I personally subscribe to their Proton Mail Plus service, which is €5 per month or $5.30 US. It's great, easy to use, and I feel good knowing that I'm supporting a solid company that actually protects my privacy. I could never go back to using an insecure email service again.
All right, I've got James Donaldson on the line. Welcome, James, and thanks for talking on CryptoTech.Solutions.
Hi, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So I've already given a brief introduction to the audience about Copperhead OS, but I'd like for you to explain in your own words, what is Copperhead OS as a company, as a product, and a little bit of its history, and what's your involvement been?
So Copperhead OS is a secure source available Android variant that helps protect devices against attackers by rapidly expanding on how much resources they have to essentially spend on attacking a device. I can get into that a little bit later, but so Copperhead OS is created by a company called Copperhead, of which I'm the CEO, and we exist in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. We've been around for 2.5 years. And we started off as a cybersecurity firm, sort of trying to find our way around the world and try to figure out what we're going to do. And eventually we got ourselves enrolled and embroiled with the legal defense industry in Toronto, because they have important clients, and they very much appreciate and respect technology and privacy and security. So after we began servicing those clients, we realized that some of these defense lawyers were not really going to be able to use trustworthy communications when they're speaking to their clients, because in 2017, post Snowden, post Vault 7, attorney-client privilege is kind of just something on a book somewhere. Most people don't really believe it exists anymore. So we created Copperhead OS to make a verifiable security solution that high-value targets and everyday people can use to really just to have a good understanding that the device is not compromised by black hats or state-level surveillance or jealous ex-lovers, and that's where we go from here. So my duty inside of Copperhead is I'm the CEO, and we are currently a two-man team. We do contracting and consulting. So we essentially have a core of 2 people, and then we're surrounded by consultants and contractors for now. So my partner is Daniel McKay, who does most of the twittering off at Copperhead OS, which is widely viewed as being an industry expert in Android security. And so yeah, like what I get to do is I get to essentially do all the fun business, client interfacing, HR, accounting, bookkeeping, mission, corporate vision, and all that other stuff, so I can keep Daniel away from the normal world, and he can just sit around and hack on Android. That's what I do.
You need to question your definition of fun.
You know what? The thing is, it is fun because I get to see, the true economic and impacts, not just economic, but community impacts that Copperhead OS has on, people, and and when they're using it, and how, you know, happy they are using it, how comfortable they feel using it. Even if they have zero tech background, you know, they say, you know, I trust the solution. And you know, that for someone to use their phone, like I said, post Snowden with all the transport surveillance that NSA has, and post Vault 7 with all the endpoint attacks and vulnerabilities CIA has, you know, people are really concerned about the communications. You know, smart TVs are being hacked, and we all kind of knew that was going on, right? But you never really heard about it and happening. And then once Vault 7 was released, which is Vault 7 is, I'm sure most of your users know. If they don't, I mean, essentially it was a WikiLeaks dump. Someone on either inside the CIA or external to the CIA dumped all their hacking tools. And it turned out that they very much concentrate on endpoint devices to try to turn them into microphones or use the data on the device against whoever's using it, or to just kind of siphon it off. So, you know, with all these revelations coming out, and it's happening very rapidly, you know, people are very happy to have a solution that is not only secure as they understand technically, but they can go online and read the source code, and they can either you know, read it themselves, or if they don't feel up to it, they can find the smartest person they know and say, hey, can you just read this and tell me if Copperhead knows what they're talking about? And I'm sure most people would say we do. So it's fun.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up Vault 7, and I definitely want to get to those kind of revelations. But those are pretty recent, and there was a lot in your statement that I want to unpack. So
sure,
you guys were, you know, well ahead of the curve before these type of revelations come out. And it's also really interesting that you're such a small team, a 2-person team. So why hasn't Google or the rest of the industry attempted to tackle these problems? You know, why did it take a small 2-person team from Canada to really venture into this area where it seemed like at a time when nobody else was really doing this?
You know, for large organizations, there's a couple of things that will halt and stop them. It's not to say that larger organizations haven't, for example, used our code in production or have attempted to hire us, you know, but essentially the large organizations, they have to deal with their whole bureaucracy. So they have upper management talking to shareholders, or sorry, upper management talking to the board talking to shareholders, upper management has to talk to manager of said IT who has to deal with said sprint schedule or something. We don't really have that problem, right? We just say we're a bunch of hackers, and, you know, we know how easy Android is to hack. So, you know, what would we do to make it better? And, you know, the other thing is Google has a very large attack surface, and they have a very large amount of surface to cover. And it's not really in their business model's best interest to try to make devices as secure as possible, because if you use, you know, if you're up to and you understand how to use secure devices or secure policies or secure applications, there comes different sort of nuances with them, right? And sometimes it has to do with, you know, performance hits. So, you know, Google could not implement what we implemented. I mean, we've implemented a bunch into Android itself, but some of the stuff that's core to CopperheadOS, Google will never be able to implement, because it'll just it'll hit the device with a performance slowdown, very, very small. But, you know, when the business model is to tap in as much data as possible, and a performance hit will stop you from clicking on an ad or clicking like on something, then that's enough for upper management to say, no, that's not worth it. I'm sorry, right? So we're able to kind of pull what we need from Android, put what we think should be on top of it, and then provide it to our customers. And, you know, that's why Google can't really do that. Apple definitely can't do that. And then, of course, you know, other companies like BlackBerry and, you know, some of our other competitors, they have to juggle it. And, you know, they do it with wide varying of successes or failures, whereas we just slowly concentrate on securing the device. So, you know, when someone has a Copper device, if something has a hiccup or something, I'm not saying that happens often. It's definitely production quality code. But if it happens, people say, oh, well, you know, at least I know, you know, this device is one of the most secure on the planet, and that's good enough for me. You know, if my email takes an extra minute to send, it's worth it because my device isn't a microphone for our intelligence agencies or something, right? So I talk a lot, yeah.
No, perfect. This is great. And I can definitely attest to the fact that it is a production quality code because I've been using it for over 6 months now, and I'm a big fan. I mean, it's my daily driver, and I love my phone running Copperhead, so I definitely attest to that. You mentioned that Google has patched or ported over some of your code, but they can't fully. And when we say can't, it's not technically speaking they can't. It's because of their business model, because of their corporate bureaucracy, the way they're structured. They're not going to.
Right.
But what have they ported over, and what's the general state of Android security today?
Yeah, and I mean, the state of Android security is much better than when we first started. Like leaps and bounds, exponentially better than when we started. We can take partial credit to that. Because as far as we knew, when we first started, we were one of the only products to be based off the Android open source product or project that weren't a Google partner. So Samsung, Motorola, all of them, they all have access to that code, but we don't because we don't include Google Play. So and when you say porting, I don't mean to sound strict, but that's the word we use is upstream because we actually put it inside of Android and told Google, check this commit out, check this merge out and see if it works. And a lot of what we put in was actually merged, right? So they're actually not doing necessarily the work of grabbing our stuff and putting it in. We actually put it into Android, right? So we upstreamed it, right?
That's a good distinction.
Yeah, and I obviously don't mean to correct the host here. I mean, I feel bad doing that, but I wanted to be certain that, a lot of the work that Daniel did with the Android security team, he did on his own volition. He did this because, when we started securing Android 3 years ago, it was much worse state. The way Android is now, it's very much catching up to iOS, and that's good. I mean, because the last statistic I saw was 2016. Android market share is about almost 75 to 80% of the world mobile devices, right? So if they're all pulling from Android open source project, now they get some of the benefits that Copperhead believed everyone should have, such as, SQLite secure delete. So when an application is using SQLite, if the application closed down or crashes, the databases they use will be wiped securely. So, if someone grabs your phone, after something's crashed, they can't just extract the data. Certain sort of tool chain hardening, and basic exploit mitigations that don't impact performance but make it a little bit harder for people to write or find vulnerabilities in Android.
All right. So thank you. You mentioned briefly about Android catching up to iOS, and I actually switched from iOS straight to Copperhead. I had never been an Android user before.
That's brave.
And I know personally the reason I did it was after the San Bernardino shooting and the FBI attempting to suborn Apple into unlocking the phone, made me realize that if you're in any of these environments or ecosystems, if you're in the Apple ecosystem or if you're in the Google Play ecosystem, that's always going to be a vulnerability that some government somewhere can strong arm them. And that was part of my reasoning for getting out. But what is your argument to somebody today of why wouldn't I just go out and get an iOS device, which is generally recognized as being incredibly secure? Why wouldn't I do that versus going with a Copperhead solution?
iOS and iPhones, they are very secure. What's good about Apple is right now they're pro-privacy. And what they do is they go and actively hire people that even break Apple's terms of service, like comics and people who make jailbreaks and exploit solutions. They'll go and hire them, which is like exactly what a company should do, right? But I mean, just like you mentioned, what you said is like hit it on the nail on the head, which is so Apple right now is pro-privacy, but it's not to say the next CEO won't be Tim Cook. He might be like some other person who's anti-privacy, and then because you're using a black box solution, you can't verify that anything's changed. And we all know, thanks to YouTube or YouTube songs being pushed onto certain devices, that they have access to your device. And so right now Tim Cook is pro-privacy, which is absolutely great, but maybe the board will kick him out And maybe shareholders say, no, we want, we want to work with law enforcement. We want to work with intelligence agencies, kind of like BlackBerry did. And then at the end of the day, that's just a switch that's flipped, and now all Apple devices are able to be exploited and used as monitoring devices. Whereas when you have a secure, open, or source available solution, you can see from our GitHub, or you or someone who knows how to read code can go and say, yeah, they actually put a backdoor, and it was like April 17th, and here it is. And not only can we see it, we just revert the commit and not use that part, right? So, when you're source available, we're saying, look, this is not a political thing. This is a technology thing, right? This is the technology that's being used, and we're not on any sort of judgment on who should use our technology. And there it is. And if you can hate us all you want, but there's the technology, and you can verify that it's secure, and you can verify there's no backdoors in the code. And not only that, you can verify and see, look, they haven't changed anything besides add security, because you can just see the change log, right? So the main difference between us and a black box solution like iPhones or iOS is that right now they're very unstable and vulnerable to geopolitical situations, right? So maybe Apple in the US is good, but maybe when they're trying to breach more into China will put a whole bunch of state level terms of service that say they should have access devices to stop terrorism. And then what's Apple going to say? Are they going to say no? They're going to lose all that money? What will their shareholders say to that, right? And
it's a huge market.
Exactly. So whereas we would go in and they would say, you have to do this. And we say, we can't. We just can't, because our customers will see it and we'll lose the trust of our customers, and it's just not going to happen. So that's the difference between iPhone and CopperheadOS, right? And I think a lot of people really appreciate that.
Yeah, transparency. It's a revolutionary concept. A lot of people make a big, they make a big ado that just because something is open source doesn't mean that it's necessarily safe. But right. Like you say, it's a lot harder to hide something in the open, in plain sight, when the whole world can audit and keep you honest. So
right. The crowdsource honesty.
Yeah, absolutely. So what? And this is a total aside, but what prevents someone like a company like Apple at some point maybe going open source? I mean, Linux has totally revolutionized the whole computing industry. I mean, that's where Android comes from. Yep. Do you see any future where we all migrate to something like that, or will closed source proprietary walled gardens always kind of rule the day?
I'll be honest. I think the industry is leading towards trying to make things as source available as possible. A lot of the issues with the source availability has actually nothing to do with Google. Google does interesting things with the code to adhere to their business model, but a lot of the issues are actually upstream with the SoC vendors and SoC is system on chip. So companies that are in China or near China, and they're actually involved in creating the device drivers to make the hardware work before even the operating system's on. Their stuff is all proprietary, but their stuff is the one that has the baseband attacks and the 0-day SS7 issues. And if we can't get that to be source available, then you can have a very secure phone, but at the end of the day, there'll always be sort of that panacea, that silver bullet that might come into play one day. And so, I mean, there are some people who are pushing certain vendors like Qualcomm and MediaTek to open source some of the device drivers, especially the stuff from years ago. There's no reason that should be proprietary anymore. When you have people in disingenuous situations or potentially low income situations only being able to afford certain types of these phones, they should open source the product. But again, at the end of the day, it's not really in the hands of us. It's in the hands of the shareholders of the company, right? So, it's a battle to try to explain to them why making your stuff source available is a bonus. But I don't see Apple ever going open source. Steve Jobs is always very anti open source. He thinks the more you can do to a PC or computer or device, the more the consumer can mess around with it, the more they'll just make it harder to support. And so the whole vision of Apple is, leave it all in the hands of just the device and don't worry about it. And, it'll be as easy to use as possible. I don't really see that turning into something source available. Also,
well,
because
worked for them It's worked for them so far.
It has, but it hasn't actually. If you think about it, the Android market share is vastly over expansive than the iPhone. So in North America and in China, iPhones are really hot, but in Europe and Asia and India, in very large up and coming economies, Android's the number one, right? And that's because they can build on it, they can build applications on it, they don't need certain licenses to release code. And at the end of the day, I think Apple is losing market share based on their black box solution.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm glad that you mentioned the role that hardware manufacturing plays in this whole discussion. Just about a month ago, I interviewed Todd Weaver from Purism and talked with him, about this whole topic. And one of the things he obviously brought up is the fact that they are in those discussions that you mentioned, and they're trying to build their own phone. Has Copperhead OS ever thought about getting in, or Copperhead the company ever thought about getting into the hardware side of mobile devices as well? And if so, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Purism's doing great work, and they have a hard job. Hardware is a very thankless industry or section of the industry to be in, because the overhead is just so much, and you have to deal with so many other entities trying to align together to make one certain thing. So yeah, Purism's doing great work. So has Copperhead thought about making their own hardware? I mean, that is the most obvious question we've got, which is like, okay, well, you run on these Google devices, and even though Google really has nothing to do with the devices besides signing it, we really would like you to be on something like Fairphone or LibraPhone or whatever, right? And at the end of the day, if we had all the money in the world, absolutely, we'd have our own phone. But we don't, obviously. So it's not really in the cards right now, because just managing a hardware supply chain is A, something I don't want to do ever, and B, something that will take a lot of money and a lot of moving parts just to make something that other people are doing for cheaper already. Mm-hmm. If you look at some of our competitors, Blackphone, Silent Circle's Blackphone is a really good example of what happens when you have a hardware supply chain. So even though they are considered very much an industry leader in secure devices, they have a whole bunch of problems. One, they're not making any money off their hardware. And then two, they have, people in their Chinese factories, kind of shooting some out the back door and then making fake copies of their Blackphone, right? And then they have to send out a kill switch and it's that's way too much. I don't want to ever have to deal with that. And, Fairphone, when we first started, they were a natural good partner, and Fairphone makes like a completely open source mobile device, right? And they're pretty much ahead of the game on that. And people were saying, well, you guys should be on Fairphone, and we said, yeah, we could, but we can't support it. Like, we're too busy supporting these Nexus devices. So Fairphone wanted to step up and support it, and I know they have versions of CopperheadOS on Fairphone. But if they, essentially for that to move forward, we would have to be approached by hardware partners saying, look, we really want to do this, and we're gonna carry and handle all the hard logistics of it, just worry about the operating system. Because at the end of the day, Copperhead's main mission is to only concentrate on our operating system. We do sell hardware, and we do sell other things like that, but we always want to just be selling our operating system, right? And we only just want to be supporting our operating system, and we got to worry about other devices. I mean, it's just I can't. It's hard to explain how many resources is required to support other devices, just because, if you think of all what's in the device, you have the operating system, you have the components, you have the SoC. Each of those have a different entity to deal with who are on their own prerogative. And it's just, it's essentially a really big pain in the ass. And I don't want to deal with it. So it's definitely going to be a step where, once Copperhead's, doing massive growth, we're doing massive growth now. And, it's definitely something foreseeable in the upcoming years, where eventually someone will approach us and say, we want this on a unified hardware platform, and they'll be able to handle the heavy lifting of some of those logistics. We'll definitely make it happen. Right now, it's not in the cards. And, we've been approached by a lot of OEMs, especially last year when we first released the alpha. I was approached by plenty of OEMs, some of them bigger names, who were saying, let's get Copperhead on a phone. And I was like, great, this is exactly where we want to be. But when I ask them hard questions about the production schedule or quality, or the standards, the security standards of their warehouses, they had empty answers. So it's not even like people aren't approaching us. It's no one's really approached us up to our standard yet.
It's really great as part of being a source available project that folks have the ability to kind of, like you said, take it on their own and do some of the heavy lifting and incorporate it into their product. I didn't know that some variants of Copperhead had been used on the Fairphone, so I'm gonna have to look into that. So what kind of license do you guys publish Copperhead OS under, and are folks available to use it for business uses, or can someone take it and run with it, or what kind of license do you use?
That's a great question, because this has been a big point of conversation for Copperhead in the last 6 months. So we originally started off as a GPL, and GNU public license. And, we released the alpha and the beta as GPL. And essentially what that meant was that we were free and open source. People could grab it, use it, modify it, build on it, make products off of it, sell it, whatever. And, eventually we found out that, as I expected and assumed, the majority of our competitors began taking the code and not hitting us back with any sort of monetary or resources whatsoever. We estimate that up to 70% of our competitors in 2017 will have at least a section of code in their code from Copperhead. So that's great. I mean, they should all feel really blessed and honored that they get to use our code and stand on the shoulder of giants. However, considering the state of our operations, we're trying to grow. We'd like to be a big business where we can hire good hackers to actually do good things in the world. And we can't do that when people are stealing our stuff. Well, I guess it's not stealing. It's not even stealing. It's they're using our stuff and then not refusing to hit us back. I mean, I have plenty of examples of people emailing us saying, hey, I bought this insert secure phone, ridiculous name here, and I see it's based off Copperhead. Can I get some support? And I said, I have no idea what this phone is. Like, this from China, or this from Europe, or it's from Russia. Like, how did they get our code? Or more like, why aren't they asking us for help? They would rather hire 20 interns for minimum wage or beer to bash their head on the wall than hire us for support, right? And it's so that was the state of the license last year. So as of October, we got really fed up, and we now license it Creative Commons, non-commercial usage, share alike attribution, which means it's a mouthful. But essentially what that means is, if you're using CopperheadOS for commercial purposes, then you should have a licensing arrangement with us. And the whole commercial purposes thing is kind of interesting, because people, I guess, don't really understand what it means. But essentially it means is, if CopperheadOS helps you make money, then you need to have a licensing arrangement with us. So if you're a lawyer and you're using it, and you have 2 devices and you hand one to your client, and that client's paying you $1 billion an hour like lawyers get paid, then we should have a licensing arrangement. Because the fact that your organization is benefiting from our technology means that, you should help us. Because if you can't help us, then we don't exist, and your clients won't have secure devices, right? So that licensing, what that does is, it means it's anything commercial use. So someone using it commercially, or someone building off of it. And I have examples of companies selling 300 to 400 devices based off CopperheadOS that have refused to even give us a penny for the work we've done, right? And free and open source advocates can say everything all they want, but unless they're knee deep in code and business, they don't have an idea what it's like, right? Yeah. So at the end of the day, this license was what has saved Copperhead. We would have shut down operations at the end of last year if we did not make this difference. And frankly, our company is experiencing massive growth because of it, because it gets to the point where once you start adding hurdles in the way for companies trying to exploit your work, they eventually have to go and say, okay, well, look, like, if we have 500 devices out there and something breaks, and we're just paying these college interns in beer, and one of our clients is a bank, that's not going to work. So maybe we should hire Copperhead, right? And that's what has helped us propel our growth. And actually, I'm not going to name the company, but they're not really in operations anymore. But they're a good example of someone who used our code. They put applications on top of it. They even had our boot logo screen, so they're spinning Copperhead in their product. Like, they didn't care. They're just like, it's fine. And they sold 100 phones, and they made maybe $250,000 quid. And then eventually they came back to us 6 months later, after they didn't pay or even pay our invoices or talk to us at all, and said, hey, we had this issue. Now we have to flash all of our phones manually because we can't hook it up to your update server. And I said, you know what? That's too bad. Like, I'm just sorry. Like, we wanted a small support agreement, and now we don't get it. And now you guys screwed up and your customers are at risk. And that's what you get, right? So, it's unfortunate. And I think, another thing with Copperhead and CopperheadOS is that we've kind of started putting a light on what happens with open source software and projects when they aren't funded, or when people are like, mostly just taking and not giving. And unfortunately, that is the state of open source, which is when we were free and open source, the majority of things we got from people, vast majority, were bug reports, feature requests, technical support requests without any expectation of paying anything. They just thought you would work for free. And it's crazy, right? So the state of the to answer your question after that long ramble, the state of the license is Creative Commons non-commercial share-alike attribution. So if you build off CopperheadOS, you should have a licensing arrangement with us, and you have to put in your code attribution, meaning you have to say, look, this was taken from Copperhead. Yes, we have a legal licensing arrangement, but this is Copperhead code.
No, that's a great answer. On one hand, it's unfortunate that the previous model didn't work, because I want to get your code into as many phones in as many hands as possible. But on the other hand, I want to see you guys thrive and flourish as a company, and that's important too. I mean, if you go out of business, then who else is going to be doing this work? So you got to do what you got to do on to a certain degree. And I'm glad to see that now you're getting, some recognition and some payment for your hard work.
Yeah, thank you.
It's really unfortunate, because I always thought that will give the intellectual property or the code away for free, and then we'll sell the support. I always thought that would, and I'm not the only one. There are other people who are attempting that model.
Did. That's what we thought was going to happen. We were very naive, and I sorry to interrupt you, but we were really naive, and because we thought, like, everyone in the world is a genuine person, and businesses would not want to put their customers at risk by not having official support agreement. And the support agreements we were trying to work out with these companies were very small, right? It helped us maybe hire 1 or 2 people, but it was very small. So they would rather do that than help us out. So then that's the kind of unfortunate thing. But, rather than just staying here and rambling about negativity, like, what's important is that, we did get some heat from the free and open source community, but we also got a lot of love from people like yourself. And they said, look, we want Copperhead to survive. There's still source available. So what's the problem, right? If someone's going to build, a lot of people do understand why we did what we did. And a lot of people are still very vocal and supportive of us. And that's the best, right? Where people actually understand that, we are just genuine humans trying to make something better, and we're trying to live off of it. We don't want to be like certain other projects that, they have a great product or technology, but then they got to go work for some corporate goons. Like, that just makes no sense, because then you don't have a fully ethical, viable product that you can live off of, and therefore, you can't put your full energy towards, right? And so people like yourself have always been supportive of us, especially after the license change. It's not just people using the product. We do have other people inside of free and open source organizations to say, what, this is a problem, Copperhead. Like, we recognize this. We understand this. Free and open source community needs money, needs resources. We want to hire people, but we can't, right? For example, so like another good example is the F-Droid team. Like, I know non-technical users that use F-Droid, but F-Droid is a very small team, and they do amazing, great work, and they work really hard. But it would be really nice if they had 100 employees being able to support legacy devices, add security stuff, and work with people like us, right? That would be most ideal. And the only way to really grow in a capitalist world is from resources and capital. And so it has to come from somewhere. And why not? If someone's using it commercially, if a company is going to deploy 100 handsets with F-Droid, why don't they give a percentage of their profits or small donations to F-Droid, right? Why shouldn't they, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought up F-Droid, because I want to get to how you use and how you employ Copperhead kind of in your day-to-day life, what apps are running, how you do different things. But before we get there, I want to just make one small point and kind of riff off of what you just said. I think this whole issue, because there's so many open source projects that have died on the vine, There are other projects that I'm super excited about, but kind of very worried about the state of their future because of resources. And I think what this goes back to is the end user. End users are still just so uncritical about, you know, asking questions about what are in their devices, what it is they're using. If I'm an institution like a bank, buying phones and really security service from a company that's using your code, wouldn't I want to know that they that there is a support agreement there, that this is being kept up and being kept active, and not some kind of flash in the pan or fly by night organization?
Yeah, you'd assume so, because you would think, you know, yeah, for CEOs in the Bahamas and he picks up some sort of state level malware, wouldn't they want to know about that? I mean, I would assume they would, but I mean, just like you said, and it's an assumption, and it's a free and open source assumption. And you know what's important is that we as a community band together to try to solve it. And I kind of cut you off in midstream, but I did definitely want to add something that's I feel is really important is that the free and open source community is built by hackers and engineers. And you know, unfortunately, when we started Copperhead, I was like, I'm going to be, you know, knee deep in tech. I'm gonna have very little time for business. And at the end of it, you don't. The problem is with free and open source is that there's not enough people with business acumen inside of free and open source. That's the whole problem. I had a conversation with a gentleman named PJ from the CryptoStorm project product. They're a great VPN. I don't know if you've heard of them. You should definitely check them out. You should definitely interview him. He's a very smart man. Absolutely. And he told me about his experiences talking to the gentleman who created OpenVPN, the actual product. He said that the number one issue they had was he had no idea how to structure a business deal. He had no idea how to approach clients. He had no idea. He just wanted to hack on code. He didn't want to deal with money. He didn't want to deal with operations. And we in Copperhead were very much the same way when we first started. And you know, now I realize that, and it's not just me trying to justify my own existence, but it's like essentially, you know, a lot of these hackers and engineers inside free and open source, they don't have business acumen. Right. And so when they're going up against large companies like Intel or, you know, BlackBerry or whoever else, they have no idea how to structure these arrangements, and they don't know how to charge someone enough so that they can grow, so that they can make the product better, so that the other person can, do what they need to do. So, you know, what's missing in free and open source is actually, it's crazy because you think, yeah, we need more hackers, we need more engineers, which is absolutely true. We always need more hackers. We always need more engineers, but we need good, solid business people to be able to take the torch and say, this is how we develop a product and keep it free and open source and be able to grow operations, right? And this is something that leaders inside of free and open source, like FSF Europe, I approached them, Matthias and George Grief from Collab Systems, and they said, you know what, we know this is a problem. And even though you guys aren't free and open source, at the end of the day, like, you guys are right, this is a problem. And what's needed in free and open source is business acumen. And that's really crazy to me. I never would have thought that, but hey, you learn something new every day, right?
Yeah, there's a reason why when an engineer that has a really great idea goes to get VC money, that right. The VCs don't just throw wads of cash and say, go off and do whatever you want, and they'll put a new corporate structure in place. Sometimes they'll insist that they bring on someone else as the CEO or something to run the business side, because that side, it really can make or break a project.
Right. That's actually an interesting point. If I can interrupt you really quickly.
No, go ahead.
Again. Sorry, I know it's your show. But that's really interesting, because with the addition of business acumen inside of the free and open source community, then you'll have less exploitation going on at the upper management level. Whereas, an engineer it's kind of like Silicon Valley, if you've seen the show, right? Like, their biggest problem is, their business acumen is Erlich Bachman. He's crazy, right? And it's like, but you need an Erlich Bachman. You need the person who's going to go in, talk to the board and say, look, this needs to happen for the good of the community, and it's good for our profits, and it's good for the shareholders, right? And when you don't have that business acumen, then you're vulnerable to outside manipulation, right? So a lot of companies that may have free and open source products or projects, they don't know how to deal with the money or cash flow situation with the business. So they have to hire VCs. And like you said, you put them on the board, and then all of a sudden they're making decisions for you. and they're saying, sorry, this is what we believe is the best. And because they have a board seat or voting shares, that you eventually, the project that you worked on is not your project anymore. And now it's going to be sold off to some, corporate oligarchy, right? So it's really important for free and open source community to, on multiple levels, to have better business acumen and really concentrate on how to grow business and operation, because it'll keep free and open source community viable in an enterprise situation. And because of that, it'll allow them to you actually have an alternative employment option strategy, rather than just being like, I'm going to work on this on the weekend and then go work for Google in the week, right? In which case, your ethics, you have to set them aside because you work for someone else, right? So, okay, I'll stop ranting about that.
No, that was a great rant. I totally agreed. Something you said sparked another idea. So do you see the future of Copperhead OS being mostly in enterprise applications or in consumer applications?
We're very much concentrating on business to business.
Okay.
It's not because we don't love our consumers and customers, but that's where the money is. At the end of the day, we want to work out agreements with banks or intelligence or military and say, look, use our phone. No, we won't put a backdoor on it, but use our phone. And the money and the operations we grow off that, then we can put it back into our consumer base. And at the end of the day, we believe right now, at least, that we're doing a lot for consumers and customers for free, which is great. Everyone gets a free operating system they can verify is secure. Mm-hmm. So what we want to do now is concentrate on the upper tier of the enterprise or high value targets in very important industries, legal, financial, et cetera, and give them the protections they want that they'll pay for, and that will then trickle down to our customers and consumers who might not actually buy the product, right? And at the end of the day, that was always the goal for CopperheadOS, is that, we believe everyone should have the same level of security as someone who's like a high value target, right? Actually, people using CopperheadOS have a better security than the President of the United States right now, because he uses an S3, right? So, maybe we're doing our job right, but essentially what we're always wanting to do is grow our operations off people who are willing, or organizations that are willing to pay for it. And that will help us help consumers and customers secure themselves better.
Okay, that's great. And I want to continue along that line, but I just want to take a quick aside, because I thought about, you're talking about someone using Copperhead has better security than, even the President of the United States. I have some security experts that I follow that I even like a lot, and they would say that somebody using a custom operating system stands out in the crowd, especially from a mass surveillance perspective, but even if they want to be targeted. What would you say to a critique like that, if you are running some kind of plain vanilla Android and at least you're blending into the herd, or if you're using iOS, you're blending into the herd, whereas if you use Copperhead, you stand out like a sore thumb?
So if we're going to use the president example, you can automatically assume that the top level state agencies and worldwide intelligence agencies, China, Russia, Europe, whatever, they all have President Trump's number. They probably have his IP address of his phone. This is just very common, and it's probably not very surprising, right? Mm-hmm. So, when he's using an S3 to tweet out stuff, he's putting his country at risk, because when he tweets something, stock market jumps, right? And that's crazy, right? And so CopperheadOS is very much for people like the president or other high value targets, because they already stand out. He flies around in a private jet. He has bodyguards. He has, tanks following him around. He's already a target, right? If it's something like where you're going across the border and they boot up your phone and they see that cool cyberpunk CopperheadOS bootload, and they'll be like, okay, what is this? That might be a little different. Maybe you need to flash stock to go over the border or something, right? Mm-hmm. But in terms of when it comes to being able to pinpoint a target on a global map or a network level map, that's already been done. And even if you're using Tor or whatever, you can assume that somewhere someone has your either phone number or your IP address, or browser information related to your phone, or IDFSA application advertising number or something somewhere. And that's okay, but what really matters is that if they try to attack the device, they can't get at it, right? So someone saying they're going to stick out like a sore thumb, they're right, but you're sticking out with the proper sore thumb, saying, I'm protected, you're not, right? That's the way I like to think about it.
So that's a really good point, and then it's a good spot to jump back into the Vault 7 revelations. So basically what we learned from WikiLeaks and the Vault 7 is that the CIA is basically acknowledging that encryption of communications in transit is solid and it works. So rather than do that, let's attack the endpoints because that's a weakness. Right. So how does CopperheadOS protect against that? I mean, not without getting too technical. What's the relative level of protection versus anything else that's out on the market in protecting your phone as an endpoint?
I'd like to say that, I mean, I'm biased, but I like to say that CopperheadOS is one of, if not the most secure product on the market. And that's because we constantly are adapting our code, our features, and to secure people. And, it's a passion for us. Like, this isn't just a business. Not that a business is bad, but this is a passion for us. My business partner, Daniel McKay, he's the kind of guy that will read security bulletins and think, okay, we can put this into Copperhead, we can put this into Copperhead, right? And that's the kind of passion you need when it comes to secure device. And yeah, you said the CIA targets endpoints, and that's very much the CIA's prerogative. Is they're not really like the NSA for mass surveillance and try to pinpoint assets and targets. The CIA is very much, you've got to target this person here to get this sort of asset retrieval or data retrieval, whatever. So they very much will target endpoints, whether it's TVs, fridges, phones, cars, whatever, right? So, at the end of the day, being able to protect yourself at the endpoint is the utmost importance. And we knew this. You did say it earlier, which is great, and we appreciate it. But yeah, we were ahead of the curve because there are other companies out there already doing great work. I mean, we saw Open Whisper Systems, and back then it was TechSecure, and it was kind of crappy. But we looked at the code and we said, no one's going to write better code than this, right? Like at the end of the day, you can have a billion applications, but they're all based off the Axitossel or Signal library, right? So why would we try to reinvent the wheel? Let's go for something that connects in with that. And that simultaneously is what the CIA or other intelligence agencies concentrate on, not just the CIA. I mean, at the end of the day, the Vault 7 leaks were important because it showed, that certain governments are willing to stockpile things that may put their citizens at risk. But at the end of the day, all other state agencies are doing that. German, Russian, Canadian, Chinese, it doesn't matter. Everyone's stockpiling 0 days. That's what they do. And they're going to always do that for the rest of the humanity's existence, probably. So the best thing we can do as people is just build products that protect you from that. And not only that, but I mean, it's a valid product to use. It's not just, I use Copperhead because I don't want the CIA to know me. It's, I use Copperhead because I don't want my jealous ex-lover to install spyware, or I don't want my boss to sort of push, different CAs onto my device or something, right? It's kind of just, it's a lifestyle change almost at that point. So, and that's what we're going for with our customers. And I think our customers appreciate that.
Yeah, I don't think for some reason, most people still don't realize it, but this is really something that applies to everyone, not just, like you said, high value targets.
Right.
Now, at the end of the Vault 7, revelation, WikiLeaks has said that several technology companies have reached out to them, and they've actually shared some of the things that they haven't published. They've shared some of the code, and that different IT and security firms are using them to upgrade their products. Is there anything that has come out of that you guys have access to and that you're using to improve Copperhead?
No. Most of what the CIA targets is lower Android versions.
Okay.
And that's because the majority of the world is using lower Android versions, right? Mm-hmm. So when Vault 7 came out, we looked at it and we said, oh, look, most of this doesn't apply to us. So that's great.
That's a good spot to be in.
What's that?
That's a good spot to be in.
Great spot to be in. It feels good. It also feels kind of weird. We're expecting the other foot to drop. Right, we're expecting Julian Assange to be like, oh yeah, Copperhead, you think so? Bam, hit us with a Nexus exploit or something. But at the end of the day, most of the world is using lower Android versions, right? The ratio of Google devices with proper security updating at one point was like 1 or 2% of the 70 or 75% of Android market share in the world, right? So the CIA doesn't really have a purpose to focus their resources on trying to attack secure operating systems when they can just use 3-year-old exploits on a S3 or S4 that they think an Islamic fundamentalists might be using or something, right? So there was one mechanism, I can't really speak about on a technical level, but from my understanding, one way that the CIA, at least in the Vault 7 leaks, kept persistence on a device, on a mobile device, CopperheadOS has already protected that mechanism months ago. So as far as we know from Vault 7 so far, CopperheadOS is not affected by the majority of things that CIA seemingly has in the leaks we've seen so far. But you never know.
As a user, that's good to know. So what products, let's get specifically into what it is you guys do on a day-to-day basis now. So what products do you guys currently provide or support?
So we provide a few different things. One is the hardware. So we provide and support Nexus 9 Wi-Fi tablets, Nexus 5X, Nexus 6P, Pixel, and Pixel XL. The goal for that is, in terms of hardware, is we will always be supporting at least 3 levels of devices from Google. 2 levels will always be free. So this year, the Google Pixel came out the supply is very interesting, but essentially we will be putting CopperheadOS on all 3 generation devices, but the newest generation device will be paid only, meaning that to download or to buy hardware with CopperheadOS on it on the newest, latest generation device, that'll cost money. The other 2 will always be free. So next year, when the next Google devices come out, the Google Pixel and Pixel XL will be put up for free. So that's the goal for us in terms of hardware. We also offer support with our licenses, meaning that when a company approaches us and say, hey, we'd like to use your product, we say, okay, how many products do you need, blah, blah, blah. And we figure out a support agreement arrangement with them to say, maybe you guys need a very small support arrangement, a couple hours a month, just to make sure things are running well. And that gives them access to our updates, and that gives them access to our industry knowledge as well as engineering support. That's also really important for companies that are looking, or startups, or anyone who's looking to build a product off of Copperhead, because Copperhead's code is very technical. And it requires very much an expertise to be able to deal with it. That's why it hasn't really been done yet. So for companies trying to build off of it, it's really important for them to approach us and get in touch with us and let us know how we can help them make their product, right? So we offer that support agreement. And the other thing is, once in a while, we'll get random consulting arrangements, incident responses, or, security assessments, or, people using Copperhead in interesting ways that we kind of try to find a way to use it and make their operations a little better. It could be, maybe it's an IT manager who has a control panel on their phone or tablet, and they said, well, this should really much be secured. How do we work with this? And then we come in and help them figure it out.
I'm sure there are lots of non-disclosure agreements with that type of work, but are there any specific consulting clients or any specific interesting jobs that you can comment on? Or?
I can. There's one really exciting one that I'm working on, and I don't want to talk too much about it, but it essentially has to do with journalists. Actually, no, it doesn't just have to do with journalists, but the journalist is definitely the pilot project and going over the border with data, or not going over the border with data. So we're working on some sort of, it's a very exciting framework, and I can't wait to bring it out, and people are going to love it. But it essentially solves the issue of going over the border with a secure device.
That's awesome. Yeah. I'm excited to hear about that. I can't wait. I saw something on the CopperheadOS blog on your website about a partnership with Encrypt Cellular. What's that all about?
So they're one of the first organizations to approach us after we changed our licensing. And they said, hey, we have this application stack with other open source applications. We'd like to use your operating system and offer it to customers. And we got to talking. I figured it out, and they're great people. And Australia is a good market, a great market out there. So essentially, what they do is they provide hardware and support on CopperheadOS, and then they add an application stack on top of it, consisting of different sort of encrypting or anonymizing software like Orbot or Web, Signal, stuff like that, and they provide it to clients. So they have an official arrangement with us. So anyone from that sort of region of the world who wants hardware, we direct them to them.
Okay, fantastic. anything else on the Copperhead OS roadmap that you want to talk about or announce to the web audience?
There's so much going on all the time. I can barely keep up. But I mean, where to start? Just there's so many things going on, Joel. Sorry. What's exciting with Copperhead? Well, I mean, the Pixel and Pixel XL that we came out with is very exciting. We're really excited to put up our paid downloads. This is like the first time we're doing this, which means anyone in the world who has a Pixel device, hopefully it's supported. Various carry issues with Pixels, you never know depending on the world. But essentially, they can log into our site, and through Bitcoin, PayPal, or credit card, they can buy the download for CopperheadOS, and that'll get them hooked up to our operating system. And then there'll also be a monthly support option, so that if a consumer really believes that they want technical support, they can pay for it monthly. That's really exciting for us because that allows us to reach the rest of the world, whereas right now we're only able to ship devices to North America because it's very expensive to do it otherwise. We're going to be working with resellers very, very soon, which will get our hardware everywhere else in the world. We have reselling stuff going on in Europe, Asia, and Africa, and that's really exciting, and also South America. So what we're really trying to do with Copperhead, and what I'm really trying to do as the CEO, is to get our reach expanded everywhere as possible so that people who need it will have it, and companies that want it will buy it, right? So that's pretty much what we're concentrating on in 2017. And, it would be great to start going out to some events and have our presence there. So we're hoping to do that as well.
Great. I've used a lot of your time, and I want to thank you for being so gracious with that. Some things that I wanted to talk to you about but didn't really get to are, as a Copperhead user, how do you employ? Because I know, like, when I switched from iOS to going to a Copperhead phone, and I wanted, I had this ethos, I want to be pure and open source and only use open source apps, and that, and that was difficult. So I wanted to talk to you about your thoughts on that, but maybe I'll try to get you back on the show and save that for another day. Where can folks find you personally or Copperhead OS? How should they follow you? How should they stay involved in this community?
As always, you can add us on Twitter at CopperheadOS. It's always a great day when you see CopperheadOS arguing with security experts or talking about our latest products and revelations. You can follow me on Twitter, _CopperJ. You can email me, james.donaldson@copperhead.co. Or if you like IRC, like us stuck in the 90s and 80s, then you can join us on the OFTC network, irc.oftc.net/Copperhead. Come in and say hello. Yeah, so you asked about open source applications.
Yeah, so for example, you guys use Ring for encrypted text messaging, and Signal is not, you can only get it through the iOS or the Google Play Store. So it's not something that comes like pre-packaged in. It's not something that you can just download directly. But it doesn't have, say, the network effect of using Ring. I personally didn't have anyone in my social network that already used that application. So that was obviously one difficulty as a user. Have you run into any other difficulties like that from customers or from yourself personally without, using some of these proprietary products? Or
So as of, I'm not entirely sure which day or release it was, but as of last couple months, then Copperhead installs actually do come prepackaged with an F-Droid repository called Copperhead. And that allows you access to Noise, which is essentially rebranded Signal. So if you go to F-Droid up to your repositories right now, Joel, and you search for Noise, that will actually be that will be Signal that you can use on top of Copperhead. And thanks to Moxie Marlinspike's recent work, it works completely without Google Play now.
Oh, it's fantastic.
So you have access to Signal. When you actually look into it, the last year of open source mobile developments for open source has been incredible. F-Droid has worked their ass off on making the application repository better. So now, as of this month, you can do things like enable a privilege extension, which means that now all your F-Droid apps actually update automatically in the background, which is great. right? This is something we've been needing for years, right? So you have that. You also have something, a new application that came out called the Yelp Store, YALP. What that does is actually acts as a middleman between F-Droid and Google Play. You can actually download applications, verified applications off of Google Play, and install them on your device without having Google Play. Now, that doesn't mean those applications will work, because a lot of them do depend on Google's infrastructure to send messages and wake the device up, but that gives you access to things, right? And that's really important. So, and that leads me to, how, most difficulty is that we had no idea how things were set up before when we started CopperheadOS. We had no idea how Google worked, and now we have a good idea, which is a lot of application developers, they don't want to have to deal with the idea of using their application on a device that doesn't have Google. They automatically assume Google's on it. So they automatically assume that, they can add things that will wake up the device for messaging, right? And on CopperheadOS, that we don't have that, right? So if you go and download WhatsApp, then it uses GCM, Google Cloud Messaging software, meaning that it'll send you a WhatsApp message to wake your device up. Whereas on CopperheadOS, you might have to actually open the notification or open the app itself to see the notification. That's a big problem, right? So I would say that is the biggest problem we've had, is that, just trying to find apps that don't rely on Google Play, talking to the app developers that do, try to convince them to write it otherwise. It's an uphill battle, right? Because why would they want to refactor their code just to make things work on our device? I mean, that's great. I mean, we can work a partnership out, that's great. But at the end of the day, if they're supporting 10,000 users with Google devices, why would they want to support 10 without it, right? They're going to have to refactor the code and commit it, and it might break, and it'll definitely eat more battery up and stuff like that, right? So that's a big problem. And, it's something that the community as a whole has to get together and work on. And also maps. I mean, there's OpenStreetMaps is a great application. They've done amazing development work in the last year, but they're still very much far behind Google Maps. In fact, everyone considers everyone to be behind Google Maps. I mean, Google Maps is the premier solution, and when you're lost and you're trying to find a bar, or you're trying to find, a transit system when you're in New York or China or whatever, right? So you definitely use them inside the browser, but you can't really do so when you're driving, which is another thing, right? So, I mean, these are our biggest issues, Joel. It's actually funny because our biggest issues aren't with the operating system. Our biggest issues are with applications on top of the operating system, because we're going to very much unventured territory with our product. And it's kind of revealing how different nuances with Android works and how Google has done it. So,
yeah, the network effect is huge. They make a few choices. Everyone kind of reorients themselves around what's the biggest network. And then if you want to buck that system, it definitely seems like it's an uphill battle for you. I'm really interested in the service that you mentioned about being able to take apps from the Google Play Store without being part of the Google Play Store yourself. How much trust do you have to put into that service? Because that's what stopped me from using APK mirrors and things like that right now. You don't really have a strong sense of what the quality of what you're getting is. So how do you overcome that trust issue?
So I would, when I originally heard about third-party APK sites, I said, well, who the hell would use that? But now after I realized that, people in China don't have access to Google Play, they need those, or people in India, for example, you can see how important those sites are. If you want to verify the APK, all you have to do is really just verify the hashes on the application, which for a non-technical user will be just, once I say hash, they're like, hey, bye, I don't want to talk about it. But I mean, if you really want to do it, you can verify the hashes for APK from Google Play versus the APK from Aptoid or APK Mirror. And from my understanding, APK Mirror actually has hash verifiers for those applications. And from my understanding, with the Yelp Store, it does the same thing. Now, the thing is with the Yelp Store is it does break Google's terms of service. So when you're using it, at any point in any given time, your Google account could be banned, in which case you're out of luck, right? So it's a risk you take. And I don't recommend it for production use. When I go into commercial arrangements with customers or companies, I don't say, yeah, let's just download the Yelp Store and download Angry Birds and Candy Crush. I don't do any of that. I say, no, let's try to keep it as minimal as possible. And if not, we have to find a way to work around it, but we have to keep it as minimal as possible.
Yeah, that's a really good security point that I don't think people hear enough anyway, is that the more apps and things you have on your phone, you're increasing the attack surface, right? So you want to keep it to essentially what you need anyway. But But at the same time, who doesn't love Candy Crush? You got to have some kind of joy in your life. So as a Copperhead OS user, when I first made that transition, a big help for me was the Reddit page. And I know Daniel's on there a lot as Stern Cat answering questions.
Very Stern Cat, yeah.
It was a big help. And so what I've been doing, and I'm glad that maybe I don't have to do this anymore, is, I got a very cheap burner phone with a Google Play that's, not really connected to my real identity. And then I download apps onto there, and then I extract them, and then I have to move them. And it's just this, ridiculous process. And there's only one or two things that I absolutely want. Like, I love the Proton Mail app. I don't want to have to go through the mobile browser, which, works, but it's just so much easier and simpler to use. So I'm glad to hear that there are other alternatives out there now.
Proton Mail actually requires GCM, so you won't get notifications for the app, which sucks. But I mean, we should all approach Proton Mail and say, do this, make this work without GCM.
Yeah, absolutely. What about one of the issues, and as a non-technical user, there may already be a fix to this, and I apologize if I'm going to come off sounding dumb. But when I first started on the Reddit page, it talked about people having difficulty doing backups for their Copperhead OS devices. And that's something I still haven't figured out myself. So I'm running around, with a 6-month-plus old phone that I've never backed up, living dangerously. So how do you handle backups, and how do you handle, making sure that the backup is encrypted and secure?
So unfortunately, right now, the only way to back up a CopperheadOS phone is by either using a backup application, but most of them require root, which we don't give out. Is ADB, Android Debug Bridge Backup, which is like a command line application you have to run inside of terminal or something. And it's essentially, a whole bunch of command line arguments, say ADB backup -f all, whatever. That's what we got so far. Considering the project I'm working on that I mentioned briefly, we are very much going to be concentrating on making a backup service because this is something that we absolutely need. It's just we're not willing to compromise on our security to add attack surface or grant different applications root just to have a backup service. Even though backups are extremely important, as anyone in IT will tell you, we want to do it right, and that's always the way Copperhead is that these sort of things are very important, but we're not going to do them until we know we can do them right and we have the correct support to make it happen. So a backup service is something we're definitely going to be concentrating on trying to work on because customers like yourself, you're always asking me, how do I back things up? And backing something up is absolutely necessary. So we understand and appreciate it.
All right. Well, that really was the full line of questioning that I had. So I appreciate you staying over for overtime and getting those knocked out. Anything else that you want to say to the audience before we go?
Just thank you for using Copperhead. If you used this so far, let us know your experiences. And the best thing you can do for us with Copperhead is help us grow our operations. So if you're using CopperheadOS inside of your organization and you think your organization can benefit from the security we provide, get in touch with us. sales@Copperhead.Co, or talk to us any Reddit, Twitter, whatever, and help us get in there. And that's how we'll really grow the expansiveness and the usability and the experience of CopperheadOS worldwide. But yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you, James. I appreciate it, and have a good day.
You too.
All right, so that was James Donaldson, CEO of Copperhead OS. Really interesting conversation. Great company that's attempting to fill a security gap that very few people are attempting at this point. So it's a very interesting project and definitely worth following. Keep an eye on it. That being said, if you enjoyed this show, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and check out our sponsors. And with that, have a great day. Bye.
say